The lady from Hennepin, Representative Allen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think this debate is a perfect example of why we have a 20% approval rating, why Congress has a 20, probably less, probably 14% now maybe. The debating the utility of pipelines is very much like what's been happening the last years with Obamacare, debating the utility of Obamacare. Rather than trying to fix it, improve it, seriously evaluate it, study it, figure out what's working, what's not working. You say the PUC, the review process is broken. It probably, it's sort of that history of it, that pipelines was added late in the game is probably why it doesn't really fit very well. But instead of fixing it, improving it, asking the agency to review it and propose alternatives to make it better, we just say, repeal and replace, basically. It just sounds very similar. This is not an issue that divides Minnesotans, I don't think. This is an issue that it's about preserving a process, and you may not like that process, but if we get rid of agencies, we get rid of two things. We get rid of people who have a science background. When we have a few people in the legislature that have a science background. But you think how tired Representative Hansen and Representative Wagenius would be if they had to serve as the administrative agency function in this legislature every time we discussed an environmental issue. And citizen input. If we get rid of the agency process, the certificate of need, we don't have that citizens input. It's not an easy process, but to me, 3 years, you add these obstacles to the review process, there's no reason why there's no guarantee that it's gonna speed it up. It could delay it further, could be subject to additional legal challenge. You also have local, you have issues, you have litigation over property tax assessments, who's gonna pay for those assessments. You have, the Garofalo has a letter here, but it's over a year old, that's outdated. Local people rely on tourism. And the jobs bill, I would call them jobs at any cost. I really don't think Minnesotans believe that. They're invested in tourism. This is something in the local areas where tribes and local, I used to call it, they're called border towns. Representative Erickson's from a border town. Sometimes those relationships can be very contentious, and other times they can be very, very healing, cooperative. You have Representative Rarick is working on right now getting counties money that incur additional costs because of out-of-home placement of Indian children. You have Representative Erdahl is working on preserving native languages. And you have Miller works on sex trafficking that greatly impacts rural communities and native communities. Representative Pinto works on that with his legal job. There are many examples of where interests are aligned. And this is one area that the environmentalists, the local landowners, those who depend on tourism and tribes are aligned in that they want to protect their way of life. It may be because it means their livelihood, it may be economic development, or for tribes it may be because it has historical, cultural, and religious meaning and for tribal people. There's some discussion about treaty rights. This pipeline is in ceded territory, and Minnesota spent over a decade litigating the Mille Lacs Treaty. There was a settlement reached my understanding is there was a settlement reached in the legislature, but it was rejected, so it was litigated, millions of dollars in state legal fees, lost at the Supreme Court. That's not something that hasn't played out, hasn't even begun. There's people that are trying to assert their off-treaty gathering rights, but it's something that hasn't been litigated. But there is that sense of that history again, and I want to, there's a document, it was adopted by the UN, it's the Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous People. It's pretty long, but I'm going to read you just one article. And this is not a, again, it's not a, as you know, it's not a binding document, it's an aspirational document. Indigenous peoples have the right to maintain and develop their political, economic, and social systems or institutions, to secure in the enjoyment of their own means of subsistence and development, and to engage freely in all their traditional and other economic activities. Indigenous peoples deprived of their means of subsistence and development are entitled to just and fair redress. And that's all we're asking here, rather than trying to debate the utility of pipelines. Environmentalists, most of them aren't against all pipelines. They just want a process that's fair, that's open, that takes into account alternatives, and that there is a requirement that you demonstrate a need. And I think that's really what's going on here, is that concern that that won't be able to be sustained by the oil companies. And I will, Representative Garofalo, yield for a question, Mr. Speaker.
He will yield. The lady from Hennepin.
Representative Garofalo, do you own a Tesla?
The gentleman from Dakota, Chairman Garofalo.
Mr. Speaker and Representative Allen, yes, I do.
The lady from Hennepin.
When I heard that Garofalo, Representative Garofalo owned a Tesla, it reminded me of a story that Winona LaDuke tells. Winona LaDuke is an activist, environmental activist at White Earth, and she talks about being in Washington, D.C. on the mall, and she's in her teepee protesting, and this older gentleman comes up to talk to her, and she thought maybe he was hitting on her, but he says, "Would you like to come for a ride in my Tesla?" And so she, and I can't tell it how she tells it. I think there's a YouTube video of her telling it. But the point of her story is that the individual, about white privilege, about how this individual is not dependent on oil. They can take that car and hook it up to solar panels. They don't have to ever stop at a gas station again. It is something that, for whatever principles that you may believe in, that, to lessen your impact, reduce climate change, or lessen your impact on the environment, or just do not want to be dependent on foreign oil. And so, and the reason she talks about that story is to contrast it to Indian people, how they're, what I just read on the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights, that you're dismissing this process where we have administrative review and citizen input, and taking into account the historical and cultural and religious significance of tribes, that you take that away, then we do take away our choices, our choice, because Winona LaDuke would like nothing better than to get out of her teepee and jump into her Tesla, because she's not opposed to technology. She would like the freedom to live a way of life that is culturally relevant to her, historically relevant, and religiously relevant. But yet you get to get up every morning and get in your Tesla and be sensitive to the environment. That is your way of life, that is your privilege. But this is something that you easily dismiss. And I'm not going to get into the, at another time, I would like to talk about how the healing, about the missed opportunity for this legislature to talk about truth and reconciliation. And I'm obsessed with the redemption. I watched The Mission. I was 12 years old. I read Custer Died for Your Sins, and I was like transformed, and I wanted to become an attorney. And so that sort of healing here and for our state really has not been addressed. That was a missed opportunity. So every time these issues come up, and they seem to divide us or you know, we all have that need of, even though we weren't directly responsible for the atrocities or the, you know, the violation of treaty rights, we all have that sense of like, because we are privileged as a result of that, we have this sort of sense of guilt or sense of responsibility. And that is something you carry and that divides us. And so I hope that at some point we can address that here.